I started getting some intense sensations, and that sent me into another regression. But instead of being 10 years old, I felt like I was in a past life. I saw myself having fear and then being killed in that life. And as I died, I came out of my body and I went into another body, and it played forward. There was a stronger body. But then I saw, as I played it forward, that I was also the killer. I was the one that killed the previous life. Don't be afraid to go towards any of the darkness. Whether you like it or not, you might get forced into it. If it starts getting tough, keep going with it. So go to it, go through it, and then you can get beyond it.
Guy here, welcome to my Let It In podcast, and of course if you're new, welcome along as well. My epic guest today is Mark Beale, and he specializes in hypnotherapy with past life regression and also life between lives, very similar to the work that Petra Brozovic does with us at the Live and Flow retreats that we do here. But yeah, it's a fascinating conversation. I really liked Mark. First time I met him and wanted he shared his story beautifully, and I feel there's a lot in this podcast that you will get a lot out of. You know, it's interesting, this work in terms of, you know, did our soul choose our path before we come here? These circumstances we have, especially when we have many traumatic experiences and a lot of pain in our lives, and it can feel like we're emotionally drowning. And when someone says to us, "Oh, our soul chose this life," it can be very triggering, right? But ultimately, at the end of the day, I've found that as I've my own personal exploration, moving through my own pains and circumstances over the years, and of course holding space for many thousands of people now through our retreats and events, you know, these questions run deep, and I encourage you to stay open and explore this journey along with myself and Mark today. And of course, if you are watching our channel anyway, whether it be on YouTube or iTunes, Spotify or whatever, then you're probably open to these concepts anyway. And wherever you are on your journey right now, I feel the best thing is to truly always come back to the present moment, always come back to the heart, and always come back into that place, you know. And it's when we start to be with our emotions and the challenges in life, is that when we can really start to move through them, because we have a saying, the only way out is through. Anyway, I'm going on a tangent. It's a great conversation with Mark. If you're on YouTube, be sure to let me know where you are in the world. Drop a comment below. Just by you actually hitting the subscribe button, the like button, and leaving a comment continues to help grow this podcast, and I want to reach as many people as possible, of course. With our retreats, I'm about to jump on one next week. That's sold out here in Australia, but we're doing one more in Australia in September. That's almost half full. And we're going to be in Croatia in November as well with the Live and Flow retreats. There's links below if you want to find out more. There's also free meditations and everything. We're here to support you if you're ready to dive in. Much love from me. Enjoy this conversation with Mark. It's fantastic. Mark, welcome to the podcast.
Guy, thanks for having me. Great to be here.
All the way in Rio, Brazil, I believe, at the moment. Traveling around the world.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Hashtag living the dream, it sounds like. I love it. I love it.
Sure.
So
yeah, I've been working online a lot for the last 4 years. So
yeah, no, it's fantastic. I more and more people are leaning into it. Well, as like myself, I'm new to your work, and I'm sure everyone tuning in today will be too. So we'll kick off the question I always ask, and I don't know if you're prepared for it or not, but if a complete stranger at a dinner table asked you what you did for a living, what would you say?
For a living, for the last 19 years, I'd say I'm a hypnotherapist. I specialize in past lives and between lives. I teach it and I write about it.
What's the reaction? Are you finding people are open to these concepts of past lives, between lives?
I get a pretty good reaction, and often people are surprisingly well informed. So if I say past lives, people will say, "Oh, do you mean like Brian Weiss, Many Lives, Many Masters?" Or, "Oh, Michael Newton, Journey of Souls, I read that book, it was amazing." And so for me, writing a book is like a long way of answering that question. But it's also like a really important question that even there's that implication as you ask it, you know, how dare, you know, our courage in speaking about spirituality and what might a conventional person think. And so that's, I think, something that we all grapple with on the spiritual path. And it's a theme that runs through my book as well. So I think it's a a really great question to start off with, and I think we'll keep coming back to it, throughout the discussion.
It is, I do actually, you raise a really good point, which I do find fascinating, is that why is it such a stigma to be talking about spirituality, or can be perceived that way? And I've had to do a lot of work within myself, especially when I started a podcast, and now I run retreats and events, and now I've got to the point where I don't care in the slightest, and I mean that in a loving way, and I just speak about it, and not that I project it on anyone. If people ask me, I tell them, and so forth. And same as the podcast, I'm much more open about it. But why do you think that is? Were you the same?
Exactly. And I think everyone is the same for a while. So I've had exactly the same feeling. Now I've had spiritual awakening experiences 27 years ago. That was when I was 25. I'm now 52. So I'm a full-grown man. I don't really care what other people think either. And if you care what people think, you're in the wrong business. If you want to do spirituality and past lives and the stuff that people certainly didn't understand, 20 years ago when I was starting, but people have got more receptive to it. But the other funny thing is that we hold ourselves back thinking they won't understand it. But so many people will sort of say, look, I wouldn't say this to anybody else, but now that you've brought it up, and then they'll start telling you sort of their strange stories and revealing and admitting that they too are a bit sort of weird in their spiritual way.
It's crazy, huh? Yeah, by the way, you look good for 52, mate. I'll give you that. You're doing well.
Cheers.
Like the question, I want to dive into your background and stuff in your past, and how you got in a sec, but from your experience, and like you say, you've been doing this a long time and you're teaching it, how much then are past lives affecting our current life?
It depends on, I think for some people, past lives are really significant. So they'll have a karmic connection to past lives and they'll be influential. But for me, there's a combination. So karma is something that comes from not just past lives, but this life. And for a lot of people, they need to process emotions. So if they're hesitant to talk about spirituality, it may be because that was something they were criticized for early in their life. And that may then be the dominant influence. But if you go through and do some hypnotherapy work and clean that out, and you've still got it, then it may be that there's an influence from past lives as well.
How do you see it all then? Like the circle of life, the journey of the soul, if you like, and from your experience, from your own experience, and working with so many people and now teaching it, like it's fascinating that we bring these things in, and we so many of us are actually so unaware of anything outside of the physical 3D reality. We don't even explore these ideas until there's such a great pain or something that we can't seem to shift.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's what I look for in past life regression. So people might think, oh, I'm curious to know who I was. But when people say that, that's not really what I want to hear when I'm doing past life therapies, in which case I might say, maybe there are other things that are more important, maybe explore this life. But it's when people come to me and say, I'm feeling a great pain. I've tried a lot of other things and I got some of the way there, but I've got the strong sense through having read a book like Brian Weiss, or through my meditations, or a psychic told me that I have some past life issues and they told me a bit of it, or I had a dream and I feel strongly that past lives are part of that puzzle and I need to explore it. So that's something that will draw them to it. And it's a therapeutic modality in that it is that pain that even forces them to take the unconventional action of seeking out a past life therapist. So it's not something that people often do as a first course of action, but it can be part of that awakening process is to be pushed to it a little bit, because the universe can whisper to us that we should do meditation, take healing. But if we don't listen to those whispers, then it can start turning up the volume a little bit. And part of that pain is something that it forces us into doing unconventional things.
What is this? Thank you for sharing that. And what is the soul's journey then? Why do we carry those burdens in this lifetime? How is that even entwined in it?
Well, that is a big question, and there are questions that are called imponderable to an extent, which is, what is the first cause? Why is everything here? But for me, part of the answer is, why am I in the situation I'm in? Is because of the first rule. I've got 7 spiritual laws in the book, and the first one is karma. And
Right.
you've got and when I think about karma, you've got a karmic connection, karmic actions, and karmic residues. So we have a karmic connection to this dualistic world where we have all of these conflicts and all these difficulties that we face. And it's through those often that we learn. So does that make sense so far?
So far, yeah. Okay. Why don't we pick it up then from your own journey? Let's start to dive in there. What came first, the hypnotherapy or your own experiences?
Yeah, for me, what was my own experiences. In fact, it was meditation that drew me into it. So I was 25 when I first came upon any of these concepts. I wasn't really interested in spirituality or religion per se. I was interested in books and trying to read things from an intellectual Western point of view, and really coming at it from a mind point of view, and even from the point of view of literature. So I'd read Hermann Hesse or Aldous Huxley, and then they would start talking about Eastern concepts. So with that, I went to a meditation retreat, just sort of intellectually curious at age 25. And when I sat and tried to meditate, I would, instead of going into a meditative state, I went into what I now know was a hypnotic state. And I recalled being 10 years old, by a lake, reading a book on holiday. And I could see in that regression, in that meditation, that I was reading a book on hypnosis. And I could skip to the end and I could see that there was a script. And I remembered, I played it forward, and I remember that I was actually doing hypnosis with my mother and my sister at 10. And I thought, am I making this up? So I literally had to call my mother and say, did I hypnotize you when I was 10 years old? And she could validate it for me. So I think a lot of times when people go into past life memories, or even memories from early in this life, they're not sure if they're making it up or not. So that's something we often hear. But if you can validate it in certain ways, like I did by going to early in this life, and so that was part of a step of trying to meditate, but finding that I had a stronger karmic connection to a hypnosis than I did to meditation. But it was really through exploring a range of meditation retreats over the first 2 years of me finding this that I tuned into hypnotic states.
Wow. So how would you describe a hypnotic state to someone, and why are they so effective?
Yeah, it is very similar to a meditative state. So is it something that you've experienced, Guy? Have you done hypnosis or...
I've done a little bit. So Petra's worked on a couple of sessions where she's taken me back, and it's been laying there. But interestingly, it opened up an energy channel in me at the time when I was doing a one-on-one with Petra. So we actually went there to start working with energy more. And another time I went back to the womb of my birth, when I was in my mother's womb, and I could feel her anxiety around financial pressures, which was quite incredible. And I felt that release in that moment from that regression. So they're the two dominant ones I've done. Normally is through meditative states. I've explored energy and focused on the energy aspects. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, can I ask you, what did you feel the difference was for you? Did you feel them to be pretty similar?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think they are similar, and the line can really blur. Sometimes you can be in it trying to meditate and going into a hypnotic state, but typically, just in terms of as a therapist, it's hypnotic state is more guided, and it's more focused on particularly regressing to times in the past, to root causes, and then healing them. And so in a meditative state, there's so many things you can do in meditation though. So you might just be orientated on the breath, you might be doing visualization exercises. So it really depends what kind of meditation you're talking about. But absolutely, it's as a hypnotic state, it's something that bypasses the conscious mind. So when I talk about coming to meditation from an analytical point of view and trying to understand it with the mind, that's something that you can do, and people study that in universities. But for me, one of the first realizations coming to it was that you're really bypassing your conscious mind and going into your subconscious mind that holds all these memories. So when you talk about being in utero with your mother, was that something did you talk to her about it and say, can you validate these emotions that I picked up on?
I didn't talk to her about it. No, I might have mentioned it in passing, and she listens to my podcast, so it'll probably come up anyway. But at the time, knowing, my childhood and my kind of the history of my parents and that, it made sense to me at that point in time, and I really felt for her in that. You could feel her concerns as a mother to be,
That's actually a great point, because there can be things that we know intellectually, and how do I know it's real? One is we can literally check with that person, but the other thing that really makes it come alive as reality is that kinesthetic felt sense. And so you may question were the visuals exactly right, but when you get that deep feeling, that's something that transcends, again, the conscious, analytical, rational mind and cuts to the emotion, the heart of it, and then the soul of it. Yeah. And that's a pretty spiritual experience, being born.
Oh, it's incredible, and I've witnessed 2 births of my own children. Right? It's unbelievable, and I'm someone in life that has really lent heavily on that kinesthetic, that feeling, and that sense of knowing. My life looks like it does today by listening to that more than my head, if that makes sense. Because listening to my head has really got me nowhere, honestly,
Well, absolutely. I think that's part of the spiritual path, which is getting out of the head and the body, or a fixation with a finite sense of self and a physical body and a mind, and going into a karmic self that can recall things from the past that has an emotional and spiritual aspect. So for people who feel that past lives or even a spiritual aspect doesn't exist, they're really stuck in a finite sense of self, which is dominated by the mind. So conventional people tend to be sort of scientifically orientated, which is quite mind orientated, isn't it? And so part of that spiritual journey is sinking into the spirit and the heart to a greater degree.
So as you've lent into this work and started working with people, what examples have blown your mind to go, I didn't even know this was possible, or is this real? Because the more I've lent into spirituality, and especially now holding space for other people to work through and release, or have a divine connection or a mystical experience of some sort, I still go, oh my God, wow. If people outside racing around don't even know this is possible or exists, let alone explore it. So I'm curious to see, what have you witnessed and what has blown your mind over the years?
Yeah, 2 things come to mind. So the first one is literally 3 days into that first meditation retreat I ever went on, I felt instantly very comfortable with it. And then they said, we're going to go on a field trip and meet the Dalai Lama. He's giving an audience. So next thing I knew, I was standing in line, and there was a line of people, and we file past and we shake his hand. And so they'd been talking about, meditation felt very comfortable, and a lot of the things they were saying resonated with me at a level where they were answering questions intellectually that I'd been looking for, and that was filling in a lot of gaps. But then when they speak about past life regression, or having past lives, or reincarnation, or bodhisattvas, or enlightenment, that seemed quite difficult to grasp. But then you have this flesh and blood being who is known to have 13 documented past lives. Many people see him as a bodhisattva. And to stand in front of him and shake his hand and have all these questions in my head, but then to feel his energy and to walk away. And I just put out my hand in a conventional way, as you might do. Hello, shook his hand, and he just sort of looked at me. Everyone else was sort of bowing and being polite, and I just greeted him as I would anybody else, as if I was a businessman. He just sort of looked and smiled and laughed at me, and I walked away laughing and smiling. And a lot of the intellectualizations about enlightenment or whatever it could be went out. And so that was something that was part of what really hooked me on meditation, seeing that it was something that was possible to be embodied, and that transcendence may be something possible even in this human form. So that was kind of mind-blowing, and it set me off on a path that meant I was on a 6-week trip in India. I went back home, couldn't get all of that out of my mind, packed up my bags and went back and lived in India for a year and had a whole series of spiritual awakening experiences. But one stands to mind where I felt that I got a taste of some of that infinite as well. So that does turn to be a bit of a story, but I think it's quite interesting in terms of, just the meditation journey, and it's a parallel for the therapeutic journey that I do now. So I'll pause and we can discuss it as we go along, but if I could tell that story, what do you think?
Yeah. No, I'm interested to know, especially if people like yourself that have spent time in India, like take us on that journey a bit, because that's not everyone can just up and leave and go to India for a year, you know what I mean? And explore these experiences at that depth and start living it. I'm curious to know what your expectations were. Were they shattered? Were they met? Like, how did it look?
I fell in love, Guy. I loved India. I was in love with India, and in many ways, India is heaven and hell, sort of simultaneously, which is part of its absolute beauty. It just breaks through your expectations, your disappointments. It should be like this or that. Conventional reality is this or that, and anything else is wrong. And so much of it is wrong, but in such a powerful way that it forces you to transcend. So that was something that I appreciated about just traveling there. But the process, so it was something, again, I just got drawn and connected to meditate. And so I went on half a dozen 10-day meditation retreats, stayed in ashrams for quite a while. And so I found there's a progression, which is that it draws you in with a lot of good feelings. So you start off and you get bliss states for a few seconds, and you grasp at them, and then they recede. And then you sort of calm down and ease into it, and you can get states that you can sustain for a few minutes. And you think, great, I've discovered that. I can't wait to do it tomorrow. Then you build up an expectation that that's going to happen the next day, and you start desiring it. Then it doesn't happen, and you're disappointed. So point being, as you go through this, there can be a lot of sugar on the spiritual path. But for me, that doesn't exist for its own sake, but it's to help some of the medicine go down. So it can be great to have these good feelings, but it's often there. At some point, we have to face some karmic residues, I'd call them. So, and that's something that, as a parallel, when I do healing work, I'll often, people will come and say, I've got this pain that I want to work on. And I'll say, that's great. We'll get on to that. But first, we'll gather some of your power, some of the light, and then we'll shine that light on some areas of darkness. And so I find that was where meditation was leading me towards. And often I'll even say, in the first session, I'm going to ask you to feel good, and you'll feel good. But in the second session, I'll ask you to feel bad, to go into darkness. But you'll end up feeling great, much better than you did in the first session, which doesn't make much sense, but let's see how that can actually happen. And so that's kind of what happened to me spontaneously, where a year into it, I started going beyond some of these bliss states into a really challenging state, but one that led to a great outcome. So does that make sense so far?
It does, yeah. And I'm curious as well, just on your journey, because I see this often through that year when you were chasing the bliss states, and and they dissipate, and it's like a carrot dangling in front of you. How much do you feel, looking back at yourself, Mark, was were you aware that there was pain that needed to be healed underneath it all, and that was your driving factor to go in? Or was it like you're avoiding pain because you're chasing bliss states? That's why you were there. Like, what was the driving factors that led you there and the lessons you learned from it?
Yeah, I wasn't. It was really an existential curiosity.
Okay.
So I don't feel that I was really. I mean, that was sort of at a micro level chasing some of those good states, but I was just sort of really curious to understand more about reality, as I felt that there was some hole in the understanding and the narrative that we're given, and so it was something I was really curious, and there was some pain, but I hadn't acknowledged it. So they say that you haven't meditated until you've wept. And so there was some emotional releases that came just by reviewing and reconnecting with my parents' divorce when I was 15. And I'd sort of shrugged that off, just a tough, normal guy, and, I'm okay. But I sort of realized that I'd carried some pain, and I was able to go through that by, again, in a spontaneous hypnotic state, viewing that whole experience, seeing myself as a young guy, and acknowledging that pain. But then I also reviewed the whole experience of my parents being young, being children, wanting to be loved, loving, getting married, falling in love, and then having this pain of divorce. So I saw it through the eyes of all 4 people in our family, and was able to feel the pain in all of them, the desire to love, and the inability to do it skillfully. And so with that came a lot of understanding, compassion, and forgiveness, and release. And I did not go in thinking that was going to come up.
Wow. So I'm thinking to the listeners here. So you were kind of unaware that was even in there. You've shrugged it off. You moved on, and then yet that could have been a driving factor for certain perceptions or behaviors. Unaddressed trauma. Really, at the end of the day, isn't it?
Yeah, unaddressed. It could have been affecting my relationships.
Yeah.
And just an overall being. And so. Yeah, so that was something, so that's a this life thing. And I think by clearing away some of those layers during that first year, I got to a point where I got into a past life thing. And I got a couple of past lives that maybe I could share later that are more indicative of how past life regression works. It's one life that really informs and helps you make decisions moving forward. But the next part of it that I could share was a spiritual awakening experience that was pretty life transformative, to the point where life can never really be the same again. And it's something that without it, I don't think I'd be here. And it's something that I'm curious to see how other people resonate with it, and may have experienced something similar.
Share away.
Okay, so about a year into this meditation practice, it's tricky as well to put it into words, and to keep it brief and everything. It's the kind of thing that happens in like 5 seconds and 8 hours, and you're not quite sure which, sort of timeless. But I've been meditating a lot, and it was late one night, and I couldn't sleep in the middle of a meditation retreat. So I went outside and sat on a mountainside. I happened to be in the Kathmandu Valley, and started getting some of the familiar bliss states. I'd also had chakra activation, some kundalini things, out-of-body experiences, dissolutions, and I was familiar with some of that. But then I started getting some intense sensations, but they were stronger than I'd previously experienced. And there are things that can feel good, but then they start to feel scary good. And that sent me into another regression. But instead of being 10 years old, I felt like I was in a past life. And I saw myself having fear and then being killed in that life. And as I died, I came out of my body, and I went into another body, and it played forward. This was a stronger body. But then I saw, as I played it forward, that I was also the killer. I was the one that killed the previous life. And so the fear turned into horror. And then it just kept going on and on. I just went into many past lives and many past deaths. Seemed to be like on every continent. And each time I was simultaneously the killer and the killed, the good and the bad, powerless and powerful. And part of me was shaking, fearful, horrified. But I felt that I needed to stick with it, and that I could handle it if only just. And so out of curiosity to see where this was going, I was able to create a calm, and I could just absorb it. And so then the fear and horror started to recede and started to turn into a sadness. And I gained a clarity where it looked like killer versus killed. But as I felt into the killer, I felt that they seemed powerful, but they were acting out of pain. And they also had loved ones that had been killed. So it seemed like killer versus killed, but everybody had a shared pain. There weren't the opposites that there seemed to be. And so with that, I was hit by a feeling deep in my heart, a visceral sense like an arrow, or a spear, but it was a concept or a word that I'd heard, but hadn't felt to that degree, and it was compassion. And I felt that for all of the beings, those that were killing, those that were being killed, without judgment, with forgiveness. And with that, and it seemed like all these past lives have been going like a whole horror show of 10,000 years of human suffering. And it happened in seconds or 8 hours, I'm not sure. But it all just stopped with that feeling. And it was like I could zoom into an atomic reality and see the building blocks of all of those bodies was just pure energy circulating and orbiting, but mainly an infinite emptiness or a big emptiness that atoms live in. And then it just zoomed out. So my body, instead of being made of trillions of atoms, felt like it was made of trillions of stars with just pure energy, completely beyond any human mental conception, and an infinite spaciousness. So a huge darkness of space, but filled with an infinity of light. And so within that was just a peace. And then suddenly I felt all my consciousness converging back into my body, and I opened my eyes and it was morning. And I don't know if I had slept. I don't know if the whole thing went on for 8 hours or 5 minutes and I just went to sleep somehow. But either way, I woke up to something that just felt transcendentally beyond. And so, I had those feelings. You have good feelings and then a bad feeling or disappointment. This wasn't a feeling. It was just a state. And the only way I can describe it is it felt like a perfection and a completion. Just a state of pure being and presence, and just no concept of doing. Like nothing needed to be done. It just felt like a state of infinite consciousness. It lasted all day, and it's the most real thing I've ever experienced. And I had nothing to do except I just, out of habit, got up and walked around and saw people. I was just staggered by their beauty. Just, there's the phrase, namaste, I greet the divinity within you. I just saw divinity without, just nothing but divinity. But as I looked closer into them, I did notice a subtle suffering. So one's got anxiety, one's not present, and they're all carrying residues of pain, whether they know it or not. And with that, I felt, again, that spear in the heart, like a visceral compassion. And they're not killing or being killed, but there's just a little lack of perfection and completion. And with that, this whole sense of there's nothing to do, I felt, well, if they're not complete, I'm not complete. So there is something to do. And that felt to me a root cause to become a healer. And the next day I woke up and my finite self was back as normal. But I didn't feel bad that I don't feel so good before, because it wasn't a feeling. I didn't feel it was a loss not to have it. I didn't crave it. I felt I got what I needed from it. So, and it felt like I'd been beyond my karmic self. And that night going through, 100 past lives and 100 past deaths, felt like going into so many of my karmic souls and somehow processing some sort of karmic residues, and into that darkness bringing a light and touching an infinite self that healed it somehow and gave me that experience to show me that we're in these difficult karmic conditions, in a dualistic world, in a finite body, but there's a transcendent reality that we can access in this life.
Holy shit. That's wild. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Okay, a couple of questions. With that, how real did it feel when you're experiencing it? Because there'll be skeptics saying, you could be just dreaming, like.
Yeah. Well, like you said, it's the most vivid. I did lose consciousness at some point, I believe. But it was the most vivid, lucid dreaming experience I've ever had. And it was also like just visceral, just like shaking and scared and horrified, and really, really struggling to even sit with it and handle it. So, it's one of those things where if it was, an intellectual exercise and, you could start reading into it and what does it mean and cosmic, but it was just visceral. And I think that was part of it. It was like just a very visceral felt experience. And it wasn't a conceptualization.
Wow.
But it does make you think, if that maybe that's not real, but then makes you think maybe everything else isn't real. Maybe that was the only real thing.
Exactly. No, I've had interesting experiences where I'm like fully conscious, though I'm fully conscious, that I haven't been able to explain. That felt very real, but I'm not of this earth. I'm not of this body. So there's way more to it than our little analytical mind can ever comprehend. I'm convinced.
Absolutely. And that's kind of the point of it, really, which is the finite mind has no chance to grasp that infinity. And so that's why it took me out of my finite mind into what I call a karmic self, and then it touched upon an infinite self. And so that's something that I do, and that was something that was sort of an unusual spiritual awakening experience, but it's something just in general that I still will do as part of my practice. So, when we talk about past life regression, that sounds nice. Who was I? But the fact is, when you do therapeutic work, you're going to go into your past lives and you're going to go to your past deaths. And that's also going to be a vivid felt experience. A lot of times, it might sound scary. A lot of times, it's a great relief and not even very dramatic, the process of dying, surprisingly enough. So, I mean, that's something I'll do pretty much with everyone I work with. I work with 5,000 people. I'll take most people that I can to a past life death because that helps free them from this finite sense of death. And it's something that, when you can take people into death experiences, or even a fate worse than death, then that's something that enables you to feel into some of the bad stuff, and that becomes good. So for me, that experience was to going to some very dark things, but ended up feeling incredibly good, the best I've ever felt in my life. And I think that's partly because you've got to feel it to heal it, and the more you can feel, and the more hardcore real that can be, the more you can heal. And so for me, one of the lessons to learn that when I work with people, it'll be like, you've got to go to it. And so that's not trying to have the rainbows and sugar, but not trying to avoid some of the crap that comes up, and not trying to only feel good. So don't be afraid to go towards any of the darkness. And whether you like it or not, you might get forced into it. But if you do, go through it. Don't bail out on it. If it starts getting tough, keep going with it. So go to it, go through it, and then you can get beyond it. And so that was my experience. You can get to a transcendent reality and a peace that passes understanding. And it passes the understanding of the finite mind. And can you prove it or not? It's difficult, but if you came in with a lot of anxieties and fears and you leave without them, you can't prove how or why it worked, but as long as it does, as a therapist, that's what I'm interested in. That's something that I felt personally, and that's something that I see to varying to a degree with a lot of the clients that I work with.
Yeah, well put. So the body has to relive the trauma to a degree to release it. So that's the going through it. Would that be a fair estimate?
Yeah, and it's not even reliving it, or it can just often just see it from a distance, and so what tends to happen is it just gets enough of the feeling to assuage the doubts. And so, if you were to have a not very visceral experience, you might think, well, I was just making it up. But if you have enough of the feeling that it makes it feel real, but it's not necessary that you have to relive painful things and have a catharsis. It's something that is just enough, and it's a lot easier than it may sound. So my one might have sounded a bit gruesome, and sometimes it does. But it's also something that's really part of the finite quality of this, is that whatever we go through is impermanent, and it doesn't last that long. But if you can go through it and get beyond it, then that transcendent reality is eternal, and whatever we have to go through is just a short thing on the way, which is also another way of looking at this whole life. A lot of people are like 50, 60 years to go. It's not long in the context of many lives or an infinite perspective of timelessness. But we get hung up on thinking that a short amount of time is pretty long.
Totally. And then we get hung up on things that have no relevance really to the meaning of life or our lives. Do you feel, like you said, that experience happened to you towards the end of the year in India, if I'm not mistaken? And do you feel then that, I'm interested to know your perspective of it, that your soul or your higher self was saying, okay, Mark's ready for this. He's been doing the work, he's been sitting there, and it kind of all led to this crescendo where you were able to then process such a big process in that time. Because if you'd walked in on day one and that happened to you in India, I'm sure you might have behaved differently to how you did a year later.
Yeah, absolutely. It was definitely kind of a reward for a lot of the work that I've done, but it was also kind of a kick in the butt and a preparation for something that was to follow. Because the weird thing is that was the best day of my life, but it wasn't the weirdest thing that happened that month. So,
okay.
So I could,
there's weirder. please do tell. Yes.
It gets weirder, Guy. So, after that experience, the next day I was accepting it, but I was still thinking as well, like, how do I integrate this into my life? What did that mean? What just happened? And I sat on the last day of the retreat in an empty meditation hall, and I heard a voice that said, meditate, follow the spiritual path. And I looked around, like, who is making a noise in the meditation hall? And I realized, you've got an inner voice in your head, but this was the first time I'd felt really a master's voice speak to me. And it was shocking, awe-inspiring, but it still didn't really explain, what I'm supposed to do next. But I bookmarked it, and I left the retreat and had a girlfriend on that retreat, who I hadn't known for too long, but we ended up traveling together and went to Lake Pokora. And one night, she spontaneously sat up. She was meditating, and I said, can I switch the light off? Should we go to sleep? And she spontaneously went into a hypnotic trance state and started speaking about our past lives together and spiritual awakening out of nowhere. No intention to channel anything. I don't even know if it was channeling, but either way, it was a multidimensional energy that spoke through her. And I then questioned it a little bit. Her name was Maya. She said, "We're Celeste. We're a multidimensional being. We're here to help you and Maya on your spiritual awakening." I said, and so I started questioning, thinking, is this some sort of personality fragment or some sort of psychological issue? And they said, "We understand that you're testing us or may not trust this message, but we're here so that you really understand this message, because we've given you a message before, like meditate, follow the spiritual path, and we're not sure that you are listening and that you are darting it and second guessing it." And I hadn't told Maya that. And so it's one thing to have a message given to you in your inner wisdom, but you can still discount it and say, well, I think I'll just stick with the conventional path. Because, the fact is my life was great. I didn't want to be on the spiritual path. I was working and, it was great. And so they say life is suffering. Well, it might be for you, but mine's pretty good. But then I just kept getting forced into this. So I feel that it chose me. And then the next morning, she couldn't remember it. We'd spoken for an hour about past lives and spiritual awakening and love and the nature of reality. And she didn't remember any of it in the morning. And I thought I was in another dimension, walked out the door, went to a bookstore, picked up a book that I'd never seen before. I knew about past lives from Buddhism, but I had no idea about what past life regression was. But I just went into this bookstore, and it was Brian Weiss, Many Lives, Many Masters. And I opened it, and it said, and then this woman started spontaneously delivering messages from another dimensional space. And I thought, well, thank God it's happened to, at least one other time in the universe. So I'm not going crazy, or this isn't the first time it's ever happened. And that was what connected me to past life regression as a modality. So, and it made me realize, well, this is why every time I try and meditate, I just end up going into hypnosis. And it's not just this life regression, but past life regression. I started to realize that as another thing that exists. And so that was, and that experience, that the week beforehand had prepared me for that. And so then I had that experience of, without knowing what it was, speaking with somebody, interviewing them when they're in a trance state, and being curious. And so that's something that I do now. And I've now spent 10,000 hours with people creating intentionally a hypnotic state and talking with them in their subconscious mind about past lives and awakening and therapeutic healing.
Wow. So like when you picked up that book with Brian Weiss, and I remember, a uni lecturer telling me about that book. And I think he worked in the science department. He was almost embarrassed to tell me. He's like, you got to read this book. You know what I mean? But when you picked up that book, then you had the knowing that that's what you have to go and do now.
Yeah, it definitely, I felt a strong connection with it. But it's not as easy as saying, and then that was the day, and then the next day I became a past life therapist.
Yeah,
so
how do you go and learn that, right?
Well, exactly. So there's still quite a lot of integration, and I had to sort of burn off some past karmas. So I did continue. So I continued on continued learning yoga and yogic meditation, continued going to Tibetan Buddhist or Buddhist retreats, but also sort of going back and forth between the conventional paths. So, I'd buy a motorcycle and rode across the Himalayas, was paragliding, learned to paraglide in Sydney, flew a paraglider over the Himalayas, just doing adventure stuff. Like I said, my life was pretty good. I wasn't, so I wasn't in a hurry to give that up. And, got nice girlfriends and, just good times. I traveled in like 40 countries and so there was some sort of price to be paid for, just sitting and meditating and there's a lot of other things you could be doing. So there's a part of me as well that was torn a little bit between the conventional and spiritual path. And so eventually I thought by the time I got to about 30, maybe it's cute to travel around in your 20s, but maybe I should grow up and get a real job. And I did that for a couple of years, and that was a pretty tricky 2 years. And it came to a head when I was discussing with my colleagues, and they were like, oh, I can't believe we got such a great job. If you told me 10 years ago I'd have this job, I'd be so happy. And I thought, this is the worst job I've ever had. and I realized there's no such thing as a good or a bad job. It's great for them, but it's just not the job for me. And it became painful enough that I had to make a change and had to really take a risk. And that was sort of when it gets harder. And that's when I had to really, like that first question of yours, it was that competition or conflict between the conventional and the spiritual. And I had to make a choice. And I started to feel that my life started to feel like it was shouting at me, like if you don't choose and take the risk of taking the spiritual path, life's going to get more difficult. And so, but I took that risk and it was tough, but I had a couple of experiences. So you mentioned, did you, finding that book with Brian Weiss when you were 26, did that do it? No, it took me leaving, going through a whole lot of journeys, reading all of his other books, certainly. But by the time I was 32, I'd almost forgotten about it. So, so I've got a specific past life that I can tell you about that actually reminded me then of that path, and that's how I sort of got back on track.
Wow.
But I'll pause.
Share it, because it feels like, I think a point I want to raise is that it feels like by you actually healing yourself through the years of just your own self-exploration was naturally opening up the path for you to the purpose that you're so driven and passionate about now, through healing your own past lives, your old karmic loops and traumas, or whatever terminology we use. And I just see that with a lot of people now, is that we want to lean into healing, but we're actually bypassing the things within ourselves to heal, and using the healing modalities that get heavily leaned into with actually not actually focusing on ourselves first. This is just my perception and belief of what I'm looking at. And I think it's just a really strong highlight for you, and commend you, because I resonate with many of the things you say, and to have the courage to leave what you know and to lean into what your heart is calling you forward is a big deal. It's a huge deal. How many people stay with the comfortable jobs, the comfortable salaries, the comfortable materialistic things, but then inside of them there's a flame that's not shining bright anymore, and they then use their beliefs, their stories, their judgments, and everything that keeps them locked in that. Yeah, exactly right. And so, you can have all these experiences when I was 25 or 26 that really lit that flame and changed me, but I still could have, not listened. And there was still a lot of things to process and go through, but I did get to that point. So by the time I'm 32, it's now sort of 6-7 years since those first experiences. And they were still there in the back of my mind, but you try and sort of move on. But I realized that I had to go back. And so I went back to, ended up in Rishikesh, and again, trying to do some meditation. And I was literally trying to think, should I follow a monastic Buddhist path or a Hindu yogi path? And I'd sort of forgotten about hypnosis. And so as I was trying to meditate, I again went into a spontaneous regression. And so I remembered being 23 years old in this life, visiting Cairo, going to the Great Pyramids, and there's a lot of crowds there and you go up, but a security guard invited me to bribe him so I could go down. So he opened up a locked gate, sent me in there. And so I went down, and it was alone in a quiet and a peace, and it's a long way down, but I got what felt like to the middle and the bottom of the pyramid. And in that moment, I felt something that at 23, I'd have no language for this, but I felt a strong spiritual energy.
And for the days following, I had vivid dreams, deja vus, and a psychic connection with my friends to the point where I'd know what they were thinking and say it, and they would say, and freak them out.
Wow.
But I thought it was funny. I discounted it. I didn't think it was significant. And so I said, I felt my spiritual awakening began at 25 and I started to meditate. But then I realized that was probably my first strong spiritual awakening experience at 23, and I just completely buried it and ignored it. And then I continued on, and I went from this life memory into a past life memory. And it was something that I felt myself to be, it felt quite dark, so I couldn't see much. But then my eyes adjusted, it seemed to the scene, and it was as if there was a flickering flame light. I felt myself to be in a temple. I felt myself to be a priest, felt this to be ancient Egypt, and that there was a person laid out on a slab that I was talking to and discussing the afterlife, some psychological issues, and guiding them, like hypnosis, through a past life. So I'm sitting there thinking, am I having a past life regression in which I was a past life regression therapist? And so that then reminded me, past life regression is something that Brian Weiss wrote about, and I've been reading about it over the years, but it was one of those prompts that was just reminding me. And so this is something that a lot of people that I work with, anyone who's been a healer, has been a healer in some capacity in a past life. And so I've got this story. For other people, it'll be they were a monk, they were a witch, they were a healer, they were a shaman, they were a Native American healer or medicine person, or they're literally a doctor. So this is my sort of version, and it's an interesting connection because when I was 23, I didn't know it, but I was reconnecting with energy from a past life. And that memory was reminding me of something at 23, but also something at 26 when I picked up Brian Weiss's book. And I'd sort of forgotten about it and buried it again. And I was thinking, do I do Buddhism or Hinduism? But I'm not a Tibetan. I'm not Indian. And it reminded me, you 10 years old, you're a hypnotist. 26, you picked up this book. And it's something that helped remind me of the karmic connection to the modality. And so it's one thing to feel that you awaken as a healer, but then what modality? Which one do you really connect with? And so many healers go through so many modalities, but I've only ever really trained in this work. And it was, besides studying wisdom traditions. So that was something that helped make me feel a karmic connection to that work. And so with that, I then left Rishikesh and went down to Delhi, where they have the California Hypnosis Institute of India runs a training course over 6 months where you can learn hypnotherapy, and they also teach you past life regression. So after that experience, I then went down and left behind my ashrams and monasteries and signed up to do that hypnotherapy training and didn't look back. But even so, there was still another experience that I needed to really kick me into action with another past life. But I think that's something that a lot of people will resonate with, and that they feel a connection to a certain modality that, for whatever reason, or a certain country, and have that kind of deja vu, that familiarity with a place or with a way of healing that they feel connected to more than others. So, you can have multiple connections. You've got to think which one's stronger, which one is part of my life purpose going forward.
Yeah. No, I hear you. Mine was definitely bringing people together to do the work. I knew it was clear as day for me, which happens, and then Lord and behold, it's happening, right? As we come into the end of the podcast, and I want to bring awareness to your new book that's out for listeners as well, to definitely jump on board and have a listen, but and check it out. But before, if you could summarize your journey, you said you've done tens of thousands, thousands of people, and on the table and everything, and looking back so far and the impact you're having, but what you're witnessing in people's lives, what do you think of is there a message you'd like to tell people about this exploration of work, or what it can do for them, or what's your biggest lesson from there that you've witnessed from it all? I know it's a generalized question, but there must be some through points where you think, wow, I just wish people knew this, you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as a healer particularly, I think we came here to learn and grow in duality. And so don't take things, we can think bad things are happening to us, but it's important to face up to them and get whatever help you can through that. And so that's why I love what you're doing. So you have, you're running meditation retreats and retreats and bringing people together and pointing them towards their inner wisdom as well. And so that's something, and so you can have a karmic connection. So if you connect with someone like Guy on the internet, and maybe I'll do that one day. But you can click your fingers and the years have gone by. So part of it is take action as much as you can, proactive action to have real felt personal experiences, and don't regret what you should have done. And it's as you gather light and strength, use that to shine it onto some darkness and heal. So for me, it's going to things, getting through them, sticking with it, and finding whatever compassion or love that you have that can get you beyond into a transcendent reality, which I think is really part of the solution. So if you gather the light that you have, so take that light and use it to shine on some darkness, so you can go to whatever you're facing and keep going through it. Don't bail out. Treat it with curiosity, compassion, and love. It can be there to teach you, and that we have this difficult situation we are born into in a finite body, facing duality and goods and bads and rights and wrongs and darts. But if you can persist, you can go beyond, and I think ultimately there's a transcendent reality that is part of an ultimate part of that solution.
Well said. Beautiful. Yes, I do wish people would be more proactive and just explore and get learn from the experience, not from the head, right? And then it'll definitely inform it in a different way. Just tying up the podcast, Mike, your book, Past Life Awakening. What can people expect to get out of it if they purchase it? And what was the main reason for putting this book out to the world?
Yeah, for people who liked Brian Weiss, Michael Newton, it's something that it's 7 case studies. So it goes deep into what's possible. And so firstly, it's got a lot of narrative stories. So there's a lot of context. You get to know the people as characters, and you get to live with them and see some of their journey. And it takes you through a lot of steps. And I think a lot of people can identify with. And so a lot of people that read it will be healers or interested in healing, or have had healing sessions themselves. And so they can see that this is what I can do to heal this life. And if I take another step, this is how I can heal past lives. If I take another step, this is how I can heal and benefit from between life wisdom. And this is how what it means to step through into some transcendent wisdom. So it's something that it tells stories. It has a lot of heart in it, and it points ultimately to some of the spiritual solutions. So I hope it's something that helps people to put words and understanding to some of the experiences that they may have had, and it may inspire them to take further action in whatever healing or spiritual path they're on.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. And where can people grab a copy, and where can they find out more about you, Mark?
Past Life Awakening Institute is my website. Past Life Awakening, the book, is on Amazon. I've got a page on my book if people want hard copies. It's available in retailers around the world. So if they go to my website, there's a book page. They can check that out. I've got a YouTube channel, Past Life Awakening, and Instagram, Past Life Awakening.
Wow. And you work, I'm guessing, predominantly online with people?
Yeah, I do now for the last few years. So I mentor. I have online courses, actually. So people who are interested in finding out these modalities can learn about them just through video courses. But then I do one-to-one mentoring. I take people who are already probably healers of some degree, and I take them through the first 6 months, where they'll take they'll do 30 sessions with, say, a half a dozen clients, and putting this really into practice. And I'll mentor them through, step by step as they're doing real sessions. So, I was doing a lot of one-to-many training, but now I like to do one-to-one mentoring in certifying students.
Amazing, amazing. Get that work out there. Well done, mate. Well done. Is there any last words of wisdom you want to leave people to ponder on before we wrap up the podcast?
If you feel unsatisfactoriness, and it can be subtle, there may be some pains that we sort of ignore or brush over, and we don't really want to hear it, or we try to avoid it. But if you can listen into it, and there can be a bad feeling, but it may have a message that ends up being a blessing, and that can help you to explore a more expansive version of life.
Amen to that. Mark, thank you so much, mate. I appreciate you sharing your journeys and your stories. They're fabulous. I got a lot out of them, and I have no doubt everyone listening today. So if, like I said, there'll be links in the show notes for people if they want to check out more of your work, Mark, and your book. And yeah, appreciate you coming on, and everything you're doing out there is fantastic, mate. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Guy.